Welcome to another episode of the Back to School Shootings podcast. My name is David Reedman, the creator of the K through 12 school shooting database. Today, I'm very excited to have a repeat guest on this show because if you publish a book and you've been a guest on this show before, I will absolutely have you back on to talk about it. So I'm joined today by Dr. Beth Sanborn. She's the president of the Pennsylvania School Resource Officers Association, a doctor, and now the author of Piecing It Together, School Resource Officers as Allies in Education. Dr. Beth, Officer Beth, welcome back to the show.
Thanks so much for having me back again.
So I saw your email a couple of weeks ago announcing that your book was coming out on Amazon and asking people to, share it and
buy it.
Yes, share it, buy it, let people know that it's happening. So, of course, I clicked into that email. I wanted to follow up with you, find out about it. But what immediately popped out at me was the cover, because a lot of this kind of academic work or policing work, you've got either like the most boring generic cover ever or like a dramatic crime scene or something. But this cover is really unique. Where did that come from?
I love that you took note in that because that took a lot of time and it took a lot of thought, and there was a lot of evolution that happened there. When this book was coming together, I was thinking about a conflict that I had had early in my SRO experience where we had a kiddo that needed help and was showing that he needed help through negative behaviors. He wasn't just overtly screaming that he needed help, but he was getting a lot of negative attention. And both the principal and I were growing overwhelmingly frustrated that we couldn't solve this problem. And it wound up resulting in this conflict. And the conflict was ultimately like the principal demanding that I arrest the kid, and me as the SRO demanding that the principal impart some school-based procedures and some school-based interventions. So we were having this conflict in that, like, it's not my job, it's your job. Well, it's not my job, it's your job. And ultimately, this kiddo needed help. So it was this adversarial scenario where really what we needed to do was work together to help support this kid. So when I tried to get that into a single image picture, that was pretty difficult. And it kind of evolved to the point where the focus of the book turned into an educational opportunity for law enforcement, where really I wanted to showcase how law enforcement should be taking a backseat to some of these school misbehaviors, and that it should really be focused on the school so that we're not over policing our schools, so we're not subjecting kids to the school to prison pipeline. So this image of the police officer in the background just playing a supportive role while the school takes the lead, and the school resource officer is there to be a support, a resource. We're here to work together. So this kiddo with his head down showing that he needs help with a spray paint can around him, with the officer turning over the backpack. And it's really the school administrator who's sitting there, who's taking the lead in this. That's a lot to be able to convey in a single image, but I'm hoping that at the very least it came across somewhat.
And what I immediately noticed about it is the puzzle pieces that are across the floor, because I think that that's what we've seen in so much gun violence at schools, is that all the pieces are there, but somebody's just not putting them together. And that it is a cry for help. I love that it's the desk with help painted on it and the student with their head down. The students don't have a lot of agency on their own. Young adolescents can have lots of different stressors and trauma and a crisis that is really mostly factors that are out of their control. They need these allies in the school, whether it's the administrator or a counselor or a teacher or the school resource officer, to be able to help them with this situation that they don't see any way out of. And then when a school shooting does occur, it's almost always a student who thinks they have no other options, that there's nobody who's listened, to them that the only thing that they can do is this violent public suicide. And I think that you really captured that very well with this cover.
I appreciate you saying that. It took a lot of thought. There was a lot of, there were so many different variations and just slight differences where hands are being held, the positioning. A picture does tell, it's worth 1,000 words. And you don't want me to add another 1,000 words to the book, that's for sure. So instead, I was just hoping that the picture really did convey a message.
Once you hear that there's a book about school policing, I first thought, well, this might be about the uniforms that the officers should wear, or the training that they should have, or how their defensive tactics need to be different with different ages of kids. I think that, somebody hears policing and they think that it's a tactical guide for how to police a school. But looking at the structure and this type of topics that you decided to focus on, it's almost like this could be just an administrator's guide, even to a school, about the educational environment, ethical considerations, a whole child approach, conflict resolution. How did you come up? What was your process to first decide you were going to write this, but then decide what you were going to put into the book?
That's a lot of questions and a lot of complex questions. It's going to require me to go back just a little bit. When I first became a school resource officer, I didn't know what it was going to entail, but I very quickly learned that based on who I am as a person and my heart and my goals and my objectives, I realized that's where I could do the most good for my community, for my schools, for my kiddos, and for the community as a broader entity. So I went back to school. I earned my doctorate. I wanted to be able to speak with administrators. I wanted to be able to speak with law enforcement. And I wanted to have an understanding of policing, both looking at it through an education lens and a law enforcement lens. So when I realized all of the good work that school resource officers can do when you have someone who's very carefully selected, when they're properly trained and when they're properly equipped, when you've got that right person in for the job, what I didn't like was hearing the misconceptions about having a police officer in schools. The perception was that a police officer can arrest. So if you put a police officer in a school, well, that's what they're going to do. They arrest, so they're going to arrest kids for stealing Oreos from the cafeteria or bumping into a teacher in the hallway. I'm like, no, that's not at all what we do. So the first book was written in a very casual manner to talk to parents, caregivers, and stakeholders in our kids' lives to look at the school resource officer and talk about how we're trained, what our ideologies are, and what our interactions look like when we work with kids, and also what it looks like when kids interact with us. Because I wanted to be able to paint this clear picture as opposed to having the assumption that the police officer that's assigned to the school is that cop. Like you know that cop that I'm getting ready to describe, the one with the mirrored sunglasses that struts up to your car, that makes your palms sweaty and your heart beat really fast. That's not who we are. We're the ones with the smiles on our face, fist bumps, TikTok dances. We are invested in our kids' lives. And what I started to notice over the course of years of being in schools, working in school safety, boots on the ground, also as a policy person, was that teachers are being tasked with more and more responsibilities every day. And that their jobs now probably look very differently than their jobs did when they first started. And one of the things that I've noticed that has changed is that we're tasking our teachers and our school administrators with law enforcement-esque duties. We want them to observe behaviors. We want them to do threat assessments, behavioral threat assessment, threat management. We want long-term mitigation skills. We want them to be proficient in ALICE, in run, hide, fight, what to do in the event of a school shooting. And I
Or
say
working the
this,
metal detectors at
working
many
metal
schools.
detector, sure. How to identify whether a threat was casual or transient or substantive. And I say this with love in my heart. I say this tongue in cheek, I hope you'll realize that where this is coming from. But we as law enforcement tend to know it all, quote unquote, tongue in cheek, goofy. And so why shouldn't we set our egos aside and learn a little bit about the school environment so that we can share some of that burden with educators, since we're tasking educators with some of the burden of our industry. So it's important for law enforcement to understand and to realize special education law, individualized education plans, what schools can and can't do, what their obligations are, and what their limitations are. Because as educators would look to the school resource officers and say, you should arrest that kid, and the school resource officer is firing back saying, well, you should suspend the kid, it's a really difficult conversation to have in the moment when tensions are high to be able to explain why that can or cannot happen.
That makes complete sense because, as you mentioned, and I've had episodes with teachers, with school administrators, with school police officers in other jurisdictions. I think a big part of that is that people don't always understand what the expectations are or what the expectations are of someone else. A recent episode, which I'll link to in the show notes, is about a number of the mandates that have put on school policing in Texas. An outsider or a teacher would look at this and say, why is this person here? Why is this person dressed in this way? Why is there this armed person that needs to be in this part of campus? That's not a decision that any of those people have made. It's a state mandate. When you can communicate the mandate, you can communicate what needs to happen, and then you can work with the school community to then come up with a way that everybody can then coordinate for how you meet that mandate. Then it opens up all these opportunities to then, okay, we have now this person who has to be on campus all the time. What else can they do in the school? How can they start working with students? How can they mentor students? I think it's really important to bridge that gap, that the school resource officer, to be successful, is not an accessory that's tacked on to the school community based on a mandate by the state or the community or a deployment, after an incident. That is a person who needs to understand the responsibilities of being a school police officer, but also understand how they fit in with all of the other staff members in the school.
Absolutely. Let's talk about like one specific example, something that came together that I thought was important for the book because it was something that I experienced and needed to be educated on. The McKinney-Vento Act, so the Homelessness Act, or residential insecurity, or whatever. Please accept my apologies if I don't know the current proper term. But when you're talking about a public school environment, the expectation would be that the students who are going to your public school live within the geographic region of those boundaries. And yet what you might find is that you might find students who attend your schools who live well outside the geographic boundaries, which might not make sense. Now, let's take a look at what that might mean, what may have happened, and then what the results of that might be. So think about it. If you've got a kiddo who's experiencing homelessness, there's probably some chaos in that child's life. There could be a loss of job, a loss of a family member, incarceration. There could be any number of adverse childhood experiences, which then turn to chaos within that kiddo. Do you think then that there's a likelihood that that kiddo may exhibit some problematic behaviors in schools, which then may come across the desk of the school resource officer, which then may in turn ask the question, well, why is this kiddo here anyway? They don't live here. Well, if you're unfamiliar with the McKinney-Vento Act, where it talks about the home school being the school district where the last known address was, and that it's still the school's obligation to educate and to transport that child, there's a whole lot of facets that most people don't ever consider. You can have a kiddo living 10 miles away outside of the jurisdiction because that's where the temporary housing is. So now being able to get to school every day is filled with its own complications. And then once they're there, It's the acclimation to the school environment and whether or not they have that solid foundation to be able to be safe and secure enough to be able to put forth that educational effort. There's a lot that goes into it that, unless you're intimately aware of the educational framework, you might not know.
And that's where you have a whole chapter about the whole child approach. And I like that descriptor, that there's the physical health, the mental health, the social and emotional health, and then all the ways that you can have school-based support in any of those. And those are all things that might be segmented to different people. The physical health of the student might be something that the school nurse is looking at. The mental health, uh, in many schools, isn't looked at all because there's not enough mental health providers, to go around. But the mental health might be in the purview of a school counselor, a social worker, or maybe the teacher that's observing that student's interaction. But that social and emotional health, you might not understand that at all because the majority of that is things that are taking place outside of the school building. But unless somebody has a conversation with the student or the conversation with the parent, you would never know that maybe they're in this really chaotic family situation, or they're in that compromised housing situation. So I think it's all back to kind of your theme of you're putting these puzzle pieces together to figure out, why is a kid having problems? Why is a kid having absences? Why is a kid involved in, drug sales or drug abuse? Or, why are they acting out against classmates or teachers? It could be any of those things, might look like a small issue on their own. But once you put all three of them together, you realize, wait a second, this kid is physically compromised because they don't have normal meals. They have some mental health issues because of trauma, and they're in a chaotic living situation. Well, now it's like, wow, we've got a big crisis because this kid is dealing with something from every direction.
That's right. And then compound that with the fact that they might be going through adolescence and they're going through this major brain shift and change. And they're trying to figure out who they want to be, what type of person they want to be, who they want to be when they're around their friends versus they're by themselves. It's a huge dynamic that many of we old cops got into policing because we wanted to help people. And yet what I found was that being on patrol and driving around in that police car, really, it wasn't about helping people. It was a very different world. But when you get the opportunity to work with kids and in that environment where it's already, there's this expectation of learning and growing and maturation, you really get to have a huge impact. Because as kids are figuring out who they want to be and as they're growing into their own people, you get to have input. You get to change the makeup of their neurological synapses. You get to change the way their brain functions through proactive and positive interactions. And every communication that you have can be a check in the positive category, but it could also be a check in the negative category. So it's incredibly important that you're educated on the environment with which you're working in and living in and working with these kiddos, so that you can help support that and enhance that environment and be part of that framework, that support system, the scaffolding that sets the boundaries. And it's okay for kiddos to bounce off that framework. It's okay for them to push those boundaries a little bit. We just guide them back so that they make those good decisions, so that they eventually become stronger and more powerful to be able to make those decisions on their own. But if they don't have a team, everything that we do is a lot easier when we have a team supporting us. Say, for example, if you're getting ready to defend your dissertation, you need to have a team around you that's ready to support you. If you're trying out for something, if you're rehearsing for something, I'm getting ready this fall to give my first TEDx talk about school resource officers, and I need a team with me who's willing to give me feedback and listen and dedicate and devote themselves. And I'm almost 50 years old. I still can't do this stuff on my own. You need a team around you.
On your point about needing to understand children and child development, you have a chapter on child and adolescent development. And I think that you can forget about it too, when you hear, K through 12 schools, you think about, oh yeah, that's the kids in public school. But if you have a school that has a pre-K program, you could have kids as young as 3 in your school system. And if you have some high school students where maybe they dropped out and came back, maybe they missed a grade, maybe they started a year late, you could have 20-year-olds who are in your school. So you're dealing with people that are from 3 years old through adults, but really the interactions that a police officer would have with a child in early childhood from like age 3 to 7 would be completely different from the way that a police officer would interact with your kind of middle-aged child from 8 to 12, or then your adolescent into an adult, your teenager to maybe even like an actually fully grown adult who might still be attending your school. What stood out to you as kind of some of the differences in the ways that people need to think about school policing to cater to those different ages? Because it's like now you're creating a whole subspecialization. Like a school police officer is already different from a patrol police officer, but an elementary school police officer needs to be different from a high school police officer.
Absolutely. I mean, I would like to say it's like anything else. If you look at the individual and not the labels, it's much easier to interact with someone. If you make that eye contact and you share a smile and you introduce yourself, you're already paving the way for a good relationship. You're already laying those bricks for a foundation to be built. So when I would walk into the elementary school, well, guess what? I wasn't giving a lecture and a PowerPoint presentation in 30 minutes with an outline and handouts. Instead, I might just walk in with a lollipop in my pocket. And little kids like that. And they would see the lollipop and we could start a conversation asking about favorite flavors or favorite types of candy. All it requires is an investment. It's a good heart, a good mind, and a willingness to be a little vulnerable and to talk. When I'm instructing school resource officers and they're uniformed police officers and they're wearing the full complement of gear, you talk about a tactical advantage, and I'm never going to suggest that anyone put themselves in a vulnerable position. But then in the next breath, I'm going to talk about putting yourself in a vulnerable position every single day. Because I would lay down on the floor in the library and play a game of mastermind. I would sit crisscross applesauce in a square in a classroom and there would be kids climbing all over me. I would roll down the hill in the playgrounds and inevitably turn my body cam on and stand up and get dizzy and not realize my orientation. You have to do these things if you want to be a person, if you want to be relatable, if you want to build that relationship so that kids talk with you, so that educators understand that you know how to interact with kids, because that then builds that credibility. If educators see you standing at an elementary school, leaning against the wall with one foot back against the wall and your arms crossed, putting closed body language between you, or pulling out your phone and scrolling on Facebook instead of interacting with kids. I can't believe I just said Facebook. I'm old. I'm sorry. That does not build a relationship. It doesn't establish rapport that you want to be integrated into the environment. It sets off a very negative tone that I don't want to be here. I'm here because I have to be, not because I want to be. And that
And
doesn't help anyone.
being integrated into the school environment, I think, brings me to the last thing I wanted to talk about, because I want somebody to read this book instead of us telling them everything that's in there. Like, go out and get a copy. So you have a whole chapter about conflict resolution. And I see that as a core role for a school resource officer, because almost all gun violence at schools, whether it's a domestic, a fight in the hallway, an accident that happens when a kid is showing a gun off, but they're showing a gun off because they want to let somebody know that they have it because of a conflict, all the way up to the planned attacks that happen, are almost all rooted in something that could be diffused if you have a trusted person who understands and has the training and trust and engagement in the school community to do that. And so in your chapter, you talk about the protocols for that, de-escalation, collaborative problem solving, but then restorative practices, because if there is a conflict, somebody feels like the victim in it. So you've got to kind of make everybody whole to keep it from continuing to escalate. But then you have to keep following up too, that it's not just a one-time resolution, that whatever started that conflict, there's a good chance it's going to keep coming back. How do you see the school police officer as being able to really be that conflict diffuser when a lot of students are kind of intimidated by the thought of this big, strong, armed police officer there in their school?
So, tongue in cheek, I will say there's a very simple solution to that. And I please understand that I realize there are no simple solutions to anything, but you've got to keep showing up. You have to show up on the fun days and you have to show up on the hard days. You have to engage with kids when times are good and when times are bad. And your interactions with kids don't have to be long and drawn out and touching on sensitive family issues. It can just be as simple as a check-in and addressing someone by their name. Hey David, how you doing this morning? Oh my gosh, did you watch that Phillies game last night? Hey, you had that big science project last week. How'd it go? Simple little interactions, wearing a t-shirt from a favorite sports team or a favorite restaurant or a favorite city. Just a simple conversation, because you have to get people comfortable with talking with you. And by the way, I want to clear up something that often bothers me when I hear people talk about restorative practices. That doesn't mean consequence free. You can still be held to expectations and suffer consequences for not being able to behave in a manner with which has been decided is acceptable. It's understanding that while you're able to say certain things, that you're not free from the ramifications that come from that, and that there are consequences to your actions, and that what you do and what you say will elicit and evoke a response from others. And that's a really important thing to understand, because you'll have people, dig their heels in and fight back on my rights to be able to say what I want. Well, yeah, but they're allowed to feel the way that they want based on what it is that you said. And while you may be in the right to be able to say these things, it might not be worth the consequences that come about as a result. So it's teaching kids how to be able to argue with each other without getting physical. It's about respecting people who have differing viewpoints. And isn't that fantastic if we were able to all of us, kids, adults alike, to be able to disagree peacefully? Wouldn't it be great if we could disagree with each other, but have a calm conversation to share what our experiences have been that help shape the lenses that explain why we see the things that we do? All of this is encapsulated in that educational environment. It's not just algebra. It's not just World War II. It's not just learning Spanish. All of these facets about learning how to be an adult, adulting 101. All of this is happening in our schools, but it takes all of us, every single one of us, the nurse, the custodian, the lunch supervisors, the one-on-one aides, the door monitors. It takes every person in that building, our transportation directors, our superintendents, our parents, our volunteers, to be a part of that team and understand that we've already gone through it. We have to help our kiddos get through it as well, because most of us have gotten a second chance. It's time for us to give a second chance to those kids.
I think that is the perfect way to wrap up this conversation, because I think this book is all about a guide for a better relationship between staff, police, school police, students in the school, parents, the community, that it's about everybody working together to create the best environment for the students, to understand the students where they are, and to ultimately put the pieces together to have a safe and supportive school environment. So that is the title of the book. It's Piecing It Together: School Resource Officers as Allies in Education. Dr. Officer Beth. I will have a link to Amazon on here. Is there anywhere else where people can find you? Any upcoming events that you're going to be at?
Okay, so where are we? We're in June. So next week, I will be hosting our PASRO annual Safe Schools Conference in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, June 23rd through June 25th. My next speaking engagement, get this, will be at Cambridge University in London, England. I am incredibly excited to share an international perspective. And then I will be traveling right from England to Cherry Creek High School in Colorado, where I get to do my TEDx talk on August 24th.
Well, maybe when that comes out, we'll share a video and have you do a behind the scenes breakdown to what it was like to be there in front of the audience and give that presentation. So, Dr. Beth, thank you so much for your time, dedication to this effort, and I hope everybody will get a copy of the book.
Thank you so much. Take care, all.